Think about the last time you heard a piece of music that didn't just sound, bad to your ears.
Yeah, like it actively made your skin crawl.
Exactly. Where it made you feel anxious or disoriented or even a little panicked. And I don't mean because it had like spooky lyrics or a creepy music video.
Right, you're talking about the pure audio.
Right. I mean, the actual physical sounds themselves seem to be attacking your nervous system. Like you had this overwhelming urge to just turn it off immediately.
Because your body was basically screaming at you that something in the room was fundamentally wrong.
Yes, exactly. It feels like a betrayal. Okay, let's unpack this because today we are taking a deep dive into the archives of monumental movement records, or MMR, to figure out why some artists actively want to trigger your fight or flight response.
It's a really wild concept when you think about
It
it.
really is.
Yeah.
We are looking at the exact biological mechanisms of sonic fear and how those terrifying rule-breaking noises are secretly the exact blueprint for the pop songs you listen to every single day.
What's fascinating here is that this goes so much deeper than just a debate about weird, unlistenable art. I mean, the MMR column we're looking at isn't just a history of noise.
Right.
It's a profound look into the human brain's desperate, hardwired need for order. When avant-garde artists intentionally strip that structural order away, they aren't just being provocative.
They aren't just trying to make strange art.
Exactly. They're actively hacking our neurobiology.
And I promise you, by the end of this deep dive, you won't just understand why avant-garde experimental music exists. You are going to hear your absolute favorite, most conventional top 40 pop tracks in a completely new light.
Because,
Yeah.
honestly, to really grasp the fear of the experimental, you first have to deconstruct the comfort of the familiar.
That is so true. Before we can talk about the terror of noise, we have to establish why, normal music feels so incredibly good to human beings in the first place.
Right.
And for an audience that follows music, we know this isn't just about simple tension and release. Whether we are talking about a Bach cello suite or a massive modern pop anthem, we are dealing with very specific rules.
Yeah, rules of harmonic dissonance, micro-timing, melodic structure.
Exactly. And the MMR piece zeroes in on a concept called predictive coding theory.
This is such a cool concept.
It really is. So the human brain is, at its absolute core, a hyperactive pattern recognition machine. It relies on building predictive models of the world to survive.
Right, so when you listen to music, you might think you are just, I don't know, passively absorbing a vibe. But neurologically, your brain is working incredibly hard.
It's running these constant millisecond by millisecond algorithms, unconsciously predicting what comes next.
It's anticipating the resolution of a chord progression, or the exact microsecond a snare drum will hit, or the trajectory of a vocal melody.
But wait, if our brains just wanted pure, flawless predictability, wouldn't we all just sit around listening to a metronome?
Well, right, but
I mean, a metronome is perfectly predictable, but that's incredibly boring.
that is a great distinction to make. The brain doesn't just want a flat line of predictability, it wants optimal prediction.
Okay, optimal prediction.
Yeah, it wants a game. It wants the music to set up a complex expectation, maybe delay it for a fraction of a second to build tension, and then fulfill it. And when the brain finally gets that successful prediction, it floods your system with dopamine. That dopaminergic reward pathway is literally the secret biological formula of top music.
So it's a highly engineered loop of prediction,
Yeah.
a little bit of tension, and then massive neurochemical reward.
Exactly.
Okay, so enter experimental and avant-garde music. It comes along and absolutely takes a sledgehammer to this entire predictive coding system.
It just shatters it.
Right. The conventional structures dissolve, the tempos shift so erratically you can't even map a grid to them.
The melodies completely vanish into pure timbral texture.
And as a result, your brain's predictive engine just completely stalls out.
And that failure is not experienced as just some mild aesthetic disappointment.
Not an ideal.
As MMR points out, the brain uses pattern recognition to verify that the environment is safe. So when that system faces total failure, it causes intense, acute confusion.
It makes me think of a physical equivalent. It's exactly like walking down a familiar flight of stairs in the dark.
Oh, that is a perfect way to look at it.
Right. Your brain has calculated the exact distance to the next step. You shift your weight and you miss the step.
Your foot finds absolutely nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That sudden, violent lack of expected structure doesn't just make you go, oh, how interesting.
No, it causes an immediate physical jolt of panic in your chest.
Yeah, that is the exact feeling.
And that fear or anxiety that people feel when they hear highly experimental music, It's not an exaggeration. It's not just people being closed-minded or musically conservative.
Right.
It is a literal, involuntary physiological reaction to a disrupted prediction cycle. Your auditory cortex is sending a distress signal straight to your amygdala saying, hey, I have lost the pattern, I do not know what is happening, and therefore we might be in physical danger.
Which brings us to a really crucial point in the archive, because it's not just the absence of a predictable rhythm that triggers this.
No, it's the actual physical sounds being utilized, the timbres themselves.
Right. Why do humans have such a visceral, intensely negative reaction to harsh, abrasive noises?
To answer that, we have to look at the evolutionary biology of sound. In the natural world, before civilization, highly distorted, chaotic, non-linear sounds were universal acoustic warning signs.
Warning signs of extreme danger.
Exactly.
We're talking about things like the terrifying guttural roar of an apex predator.
Yes, or the deafening, chaotic roar of a violent hurricane.
Wow, yeah, or even the sound of violent physical destruction, like massive trees snapping, rock slides, things breaking.
Precisely. The human auditory system evolved to be hypervigilant against extreme volume, heavy acoustic distortion, and sharp metallic frequencies.
That makes total sense.
Right. If you are a prehistoric human and you hear those non-linear distorted frequencies, and you don't immediately feel a spike of cortisol and anxiety, well, you aren't going to survive the day.
Okay, I hear you, but let me push back on this for a second.
Sure.
If our lizard brains are so utterly terrified of these specific harsh frequencies, why do some people actively seek them out?
Oh, that's a great question.
I mean, why do teenagers blast heavy metal, or why do people go to industrial raves, or even just fall asleep to harsh white noise?
Hmm.
If it's pure primal fear, shouldn't we all be sprinting out of the room the second someone turns on a distortion pedal?
Well, that is the exact paradox that experimental artists play with. The difference is the context of safety.
Okay.
It is the exact same psychological mechanism as riding a roller coaster or watching a horror movie.
Oh, I see.
You are subjecting your nervous system to the biological triggers of terror, the drops, the jump scares, the roaring frequencies, but the higher cognitive functions of your brain know you are in a safe, controlled environment.
Ah, so it's safe danger. You get the massive adrenaline rush of surviving a predator attack without actually being eaten.
Exactly. And what the MMR column highlights is that in the late 20th century, specifically looking at the extreme noise music scene of the 1970s,
Oh, yeah.
think of pioneering industrial and noise bands like Throbbing Gristle or the Japanese noise artist Merzbow.
Right.
Those musicians began to weaponize this biology intentionally. They were building these massive walls of piercing frequencies, heavy feedback loops, and pure acoustic distortion.
So they weren't just making a racket because they didn't know how to play the guitar.
Not at all. It was a highly calculated psychological experiment. These artists were actively exploring how far they could push human endurance.
Wow.
By using the specific abrasive elements, they were completely bypassing musical logic and tapping directly into our ancient survival-based fight-or-flight responses.
They were playing the human nervous system like an instrument.
That's a great way to put it.
But if biology hardwired us to reject these sounds, who in their right mind first decided that this was a valid form of art? I mean, where did this even start?
Well, the MMR timeline takes us back to a massive artistic rupture in the early 20th century, specifically Italy in the year 1913.
1913. This is such a pivotal cultural moment right on the edge of the First World War.
Exactly.
We are introduced to Luigi Russolo, an Italian futurist, and he writes this incredibly aggressive manifesto called The Art of Noises.
Russolo's manifesto was an absolute hand grenade thrown into the European classical establishment.
Totally.
He looked at 19th century classical music with its strict orchestral rules, its elegant concert halls, and its pleasant harmonies. And he argued that it was completely, hopelessly disconnected from the reality of the modern world.
Because the world was industrializing at a terrifying speed. He looked around and saw what he called a civilization of noise.
Yes. Think about the sonic landscape of Europe shifting basically overnight. The 20th century brought the internal combustion engine, massive steel factories, tramways, the hum of electricity, and bustling, chaotic modern cities.
Right.
These sounds, the grinding of massive gears, the shrieking of steam valves, they simply did not exist in the Beethoven or Mozart repertoire.
No, not at all.
So Russolo believed that forcing modern people to sit in silence and listen to delicate violins was basically a form of historical denial. He argued that modern art needed to embrace the actual sonic reality of the machine age.
And he didn't just write a pretentious essay and leave it at that. He actually built these massive, bizarre noise-making machines called intonaramori.
Right?
They were these big wooden boxes with megaphones attached to them, designed to synthetically recreate the sounds of factories and
It's
sirens.
just brilliant.
And he held public concerts to play these industrial noises for upper-class audiences. And the reaction was complete chaos. The archives talk about immediate anger, confusion, and literal brawls breaking out in the theater.
I mean, imagine being a wealthy aristocrat in 1913. You're putting on your finest clothes, expecting to hear a soothing traditional symphony, and instead, you're confronted by a man cranking a wooden box that sounds like a collapsing steel mill.
It's hilarious.
The psychological rejection was incredibly violent.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. There's a massive, almost tragic irony here.
Yeah.
These audiences were throwing vegetables and getting into fistfights over this music. But the sounds that were terrifying them so much in that concert hall were the exact same sounds they were living with every single day on the streets of Milan or Paris.
Oh, absolutely.
You're rioting over the soundtrack of their own modern lives.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is exactly why Russolo's legacy is so profound. Despite the riots, he proved something fundamental that changed art forever.
Which is?
Noise is not the enemy of music. It is simply a new material. He expanded the acoustic palette. He proved that music doesn't just have to be beautiful, it can also be honest. And honestly, the modern world is chaotic.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But conquering harsh industrial noise was really just step one. Once the avant-garde artists realized they could use pure noise as a material, they started messing with the foundational physics of sound itself.
Right. Things like time, chance, and even the concept of silence.
The evolution from Russolo is incredibly rapid. By the 1930s and 40s, you have the birth of early electronic music and musique concrete in France.
Yes, where artists are literally slicing up magnetic tape to manipulate environmental sounds.
But the absolute paradigm shift happens in the mid-century, with this deep philosophical obsession with chance and acoustic ecology.
Which brings us to 1952, and maybe the most famous and, frankly, to a lot of people, the most infuriating piece of experimental music ever written.
Oh, yeah. We're talking about John Cage's 453.
It is the ultimate test of the audience. The premiere takes place in a concert hall in Woodstock, New York. A highly respected pianist sits down at the piano, opens the lid, and plays absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
For exactly 4 minutes and 33 seconds.
He just sits there.
Mm-hmm.
He tracks the time with a stopwatch, occasionally closing and opening the piano lid to mark the movements of the piece. And the audience, predictably, loses their minds.
Totally.
They start whispering, shifting uncomfortably in their seats, coughing. You can hear the wind outside the hall, rain on the roof. And the genius of Cage is that that is the piece.
Exactly. All of those ambient, accidental sounds become the music.
Because Cage realized that true silence doesn't actually exist.
Right. There is always sound. And by framing that duration of time, he forced the audience to listen to their own environment.
It's like an artist taking an empty wooden picture frame, walking up to an open window and holding the frame up to the street.
Oh, I love that analogy.
They are telling you, I didn't paint anything.
Yeah.
But whatever happens to pass through this frame, a bird flying by, a siren in the distance, a kid shouting, that is the art.
Yes.
They're demanding that you pay attention to the world you usually filter out.
That is a beautiful way to visualize it. And that philosophy absolutely exploded into the 1960s with the Fluxus movement.
Right. Artists like Yoko Ono and Nam Jin Pak, who completely blurred the lines between daily life, performance art, and music. The core thesis that MMR presents here is that these experiments, whether it was Cage's violence or the tape splicing of the 40s or the aggressive Japanese noise walls of the 70s, they didn't destroy music.
No.
They completely expanded the geography of where music could exist and what it could be made of.
They dragged music out of the ivory tower of the concert hall and realized it was literally everywhere.
Precisely.
But let's shift the focus right now onto you, the listener, navigating your daily life. Because it's really easy to look at this history and think, well, sure, silent pianos and angry Italians with noise boxes are intellectually neat.
Yeah, but how does it affect me?
Right. I'm just a person who wants to listen to a good streaming playlist on my commute. Why should I care about this weird avant-garde history?
You should care because the music on that commute physically would not exist without those weird avant-garde experiments.
Oh, really? Oh, absolutely. The MMR archive dives deep into the historical cycle of cultural acclimatization. Every single new form of art is initially misunderstood.
Right.
It causes psychological friction, it triggers that predictive failure we talked about earlier, and it faces intense, sometimes violent rejection from the mainstream.
Yeah, the article actually traces this back through history.
Okay.
Like, Impressionist painting was considered an insult to the eyes. Early jazz was labeled by critics as dangerous, chaotic noise.
Exactly.
Rock and roll was literally protested as a threat to the moral fabric of society.
Right.
All of these are initially feared by the establishment.
Because they were new, they broke the established patterns, and as we discussed, the brain fears what it cannot easily predict.
Right.
But here is the vital mechanism the column introduces. Experimental music functions as the research and development laboratory for the entire mainstream music industry.
The R&D lab. I love that framing. So the avant-garde artists are basically the mad scientists doing the dangerous beta testing?
Precisely. If you look at the timeline progressing into modern pop, you see this direct pipeline. It's a process of neuroplasticity at a cultural scale.
Okay, walk me through that.
So the brain hears a terrifying new sound, rejects it, but over decades of repeated, diluted exposure, the brain builds a new predictive model. What was once terrifying noise becomes a recognized, comfortable pattern.
So what does this all mean in practice? Are you seriously saying that the terrifying, incomprehensible noise artists slicing up tape in the 1950s are the architects of today's top 40 pop hits? Because those seem like two totally different universes.
Well, this raises an important question about how we judge art in the moment, because honestly, yes, they absolutely are.
Wow.
Let's look at specific examples from the archive. Take the music concrete pioneers in the 1940s and 50s.
Yeah.
Artists like Pierre Schaeffer or Delia Derbyshire at the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, they were doing these insane, painstaking experiments, manually cutting and splicing magnetic tape to loop non-musical sounds.
Right, and it was considered totally bizarre avant-garde academic work at the time.
Exactly. But without that tape splicing and looping.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, you don't get the invention of the sampler.
Oh, wow.
That bizarre avant-garde technique directly laid the technological foundation for the drum machines and samplers of the 1980s. Which means, without those mid-century experimentalists, you do not get the golden age of 90s hip-hop.
That's wild.
You don't get Jay Dilla. You don't get the modern pop hook, which is almost entirely reliant on sampled, looped audio.
That is a direct line. Okay, but what about the really harsh stuff, like the industrial noise and the pure distortion?
Let's look at the heavy, punishing distortion of 1980s industrial music and early Detroit techno. At the time, playing a drum machine through a broken, distorted guitar pedal was considered hostile. It was unlistenable by mainstream standards.
Yeah, pure noise.
Today, that heavily distorted, blown-out 808 bass sound is the default foundation of modern trap music, hip-hop, and massive pop hits by artists like Billie Eilish or Travis Scott.
It's everywhere.
It went from being a literal sonic weapon to being the most bankable sound in the music industry.
It's an incredible pipeline. So the weirdos in the lab figure out how to make a totally new sound using a broken machine. The establishment gets furious at them.
Yeah.
And then 30, 40 years later, that exact noise is the hook in the #1 song in the world playing in a grocery store.
Exactly. And by the time it reaches the grocery store, our collective neurobiology has adapted.
Right.
Our brains have learned the pattern. The neuroplasticity has done its job. The sound is no longer unpredictable. It is no longer a biological threat. It has become comfortable.
That is just wild to think about. Let's synthesize this whole journey we've been on, because we've covered a lot of ground today.
We really have.
We started with the brain's deep biological need for predictive coding. That dopamine loop of expectation and reward that makes a pop melody feel so good.
Right?
Then we explored our evolutionary fear of distorted, chaotic natural sounds and how nonlinear frequencies trigger our primal survival instincts.
From there, we witnessed Luigi Russolo's 1913 Industrial Noise Rebellion, where artists decided to reflect the modern mechanical world, even if it caused literal riots.
Right, and then we watched John Cage force us to listen to the silence of our own environment.
And finally, we arrived at the realization that all of this chance, noise, and terrifying disorder actually serves as the essential R&D lab for modern pop music.
It really reframes the whole concept of bad music.
Yeah.
It makes you realize that calling something noise just means you haven't figured out the pattern yet.
It really does. And the MMR archive leaves us with a final, really profound philosophical takeaway.
Yeah.
Music history is not a static museum. It is a constant, unending quest for new sounds. We inherently want to know how far the boundaries of human expression can be pushed.
Right.
And fear, in this context, is not a sign of failure. Fear is just evidence of the unknown.
Because if a piece of art doesn't scare the culture at least a little bit, it's probably not actually doing anything new.
Precisely. The unknown is the ultimate wellspring of human creation. Art has always lived on that fragile, tense border between primal fear and intellectual curiosity.
Wow.
Experimental music is simply the courageous act of standing right on that boundary, staring into the dark, and seeing what sounds come back.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
So here is a thought for you to take with you today. The next time you hear a sound out in the world that makes you instinctively uncomfortable, whether it's